to The Art of Adventure. This is episode 262 with Akansha Agrawal. The Art of Adventure is the podcast that helps you travel the world, run your business, and embark on an epic quest. I'm your host, lead explorer, and guide Derek Loudermilk. You can head over to derekloudermilk.com to check out the show notes for this episode and find out about all the other things that I do, including Adventure Quest trips, superconductors, the book, and, of course, business coaching for digital nomads and thought leaders. Let's jump right into today's episode with Akansha Agrawal. We are new friends, and we met in person last month in early 2019. And she is the founder of Citrus and Gold, which is a marketing coaching / consulting business for thought leaders, coaches, and healers. And I wanted to bring her on since many of my clients are thought leaders. And for myself, I know that creating the right content, knowing exactly what to post on Instagram or Facebook or what to write an email about is something that I'm constantly thinking about and refining. And she is really good at honing in on what you think and feel, and then how does that relate to your customer, what you actually want to sell and their journey and who they are. So how do you create a post, a social media post that is engaging and eventually leads someone to become a customer, or leads someone to buy from you? So we're going to talk about how to understand your own business objectives as a starting point for determining what you're going to put out there in terms of content, how to do research and understand your customer, and then actually how to write the posts that place your customer, your audience, as the hero of the story. Then we're going to talk about some systems like content calendars and underlying things that make this easy and that make it much better for you to continue and be consistent with posting on Instagram, posting on Facebook, writing emails to your clients. She's going to teach us how content actually makes us money, how it leads people to buy from you. And then I ask her a couple of personal questions. How can I have my team help me out with this? How could you have your team help you out with this as well? And then we go through lots of examples where she says, here's what I did with one of my clients. So you can clearly see how she's taking this knowledge that she's cultivated over working in large organizations. She used to work for LinkedIn, to her private consulting practice and working with a lot of solopreneurs. So this is a great episode for those of you that are posting regularly to social media in hopes of building a tribe, building a business, building a community. Akansha is great at clear thinking and making this stuff accessible. So I think you'll really love this interview with Akansha Agrawal. Akansha, hi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
And it's cool that we're connecting. I remember we met in person briefly last month at a mastermind, and the first thing I saw sitting on your table was this beautiful cookbook, the Healthy Indian Cookbook, I believe. And actually, I'm curious. Let's start there. Actually, the cookbook is not sort of like your main business, but could you just tell me a little bit about where that cookbook, how that happened to come about?
Yeah, definitely. So the cookbook, the Healthy Indian Food Cookbook, is actually a passion project between my mom and I. So my mom is like the creative ultimate chef who just knows how to cook everything. And here I am, like, I want to learn how to make Indian food. And I realized I wasn't the only one with that desire. And not only any Indian food, just Indian food that's generally healthy and easy to make. So catering it to our generations now. So this was a project I just kind of had like at spur of the moment back in 2017. And I mean, it was just an idea to this big production. I had no idea how much work it was going to be. But yeah, it was essentially a way to like bring some of our family stories to the world, make people more or less intimidated with cooking Indian food. And also for me, like a way just to test out building a product and marketing it and having fun with it.
Mm. And did you take all the photos of the dishes in there?
Actually, I did. I took most of the photos. There are some, like including the cover, which I hired a friend to do. Obviously, the ones of my mom and I didn't do. But yeah, I even tested my photography skills, which was interesting.
And what did you learn from that test of creating what is now a physical cookbook?
Ooh, a lot. I mean, the first thing is like there was way more to do than I expected. So I went into it being a bit naive, which I'm glad I did, because if I knew how much work it would be to find a designer, a copy editor, like figure out how I want to produce this and publish it, like all of those details would have overwhelmed me. So I think just learning the different steps it takes to self-publish was huge. I mean, we didn't even go onto Amazon right now because it just didn't make sense. But I think the biggest learning I had for anyone who's thinking of writing their own book is like really know what your takeaways of the book is. Like, who is this for? I mean, we talk about marketing all the time, like your ideal client, but yeah, essentially like, why are you making this? And like, who is this going to serve the most? And doing that research, even pre-production, to then when you're ready to market it, like understanding what's going to really connect with people, because, you can create an amazing, amazing product, but if other people can't see the value of it, it's going to be hard to sell it essentially.
And did you do some research? You talked about like for our generation. Did you do some research before you produced it?
Yeah, so I sent out like a survey with like friends and friends of friends and people who I knew would be the target market of this. I got probably like 100 to 150 people to respond to the survey.
Oh, cool.
As my first kind of initial test or research, and it was asking questions about like, what are your common struggles when it comes to cooking? What are your like fears? What do you want? So understanding their pains and desires, but also a little bit about like, well, what other kind of cookbooks have they bought? Like, do they like ebooks versus paperbacks? So some of it was to inform messaging. Other was just like pure like, okay, what do we actually create? Because we had no idea. At first, I was just going to create a digital copy until I realized that people really like tangible products. So we made that happen too. Yeah,
and beautiful, colorful Indian food is mouthwatering to look at.
Yeah.
Wow. That's cool. And then so since your expertise is in the marketing, how have you marketed it so far? And it's interesting to hear that it's not on Amazon.
Yeah, so I primarily have marketed it like kind of grassroots. So from the time we started building it or creating it, I started a wait list for the book and started collecting emails and just slowly having people who are interested drop their email. So I had a list. It was very small, actually. I probably had a list of, well, relatively small. I think it's still pretty good. Like 500 to 600 people on the wait list. Soon enough to be like, okay, there's some traction there. I'll be completely honest. There's a lot I could be doing for marketing, but I sometimes have to think about how much time and energy do I have to market it. So right. The ways I've been doing right now have been very organic, very simple and easy right now. So email marketing was huge when I first launched it. I think like out of my list when I first did it, I like sent like 5 different emails like within like 2 or 3 days, just kind of like push people on it and like told stories about what this is, not just like, oh, just buy it now. And that turned to be really effective. I think from that list of people I had, I think like 10% bought immediately, which is pretty big. So that was really cool. Social media is something I tried too, and we can get into that. But I feel like social media marketing is really good at first for brand awareness. It doesn't convert immediately. Mm-hmm. So that was interesting, but it did work. It just like took a little slower. And then honestly, like good old like meeting people in person, like bringing a copy of my book wherever I go and just having like at the mastermind, I had a few extra copies. So yeah. Really leveraging like in-person connections and using that. One thing along that side of just social media that I remembered, I think I started testing out a little bit was influencer marketing and working with micro influencers. And I think that could be interesting conversation because I know a lot of your clients fall into that realm. So I tried working with influencers from like other as little as 30,000 followers to 30,000 followers, like still in that micro niche. I really tried to choose people who have a really loyal and engaged audience. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. Like one really good success was with this one influencer. We just sent her a free book and she got us like 25 sales within the day. So that was really, really cool. Yeah. So I'm just like testing out and playing around with different things, from partnerships, emails, like doing sales when it feels right. Being curious about the process and having fun with this, really how I'm trying to do this, instead of being like, oh, I have to do this a certain way and get stressed out about all the ways I could be marketing it.
Yeah. I really love that. It reminds me of an interview with another marketer on the show, Danny Flood, and he talked about how he wanted to increase his rate of failure to increase his rate of learning. So he was just trying all kinds of different things. So that approach clearly is working for both of you guys. I'm curious about this influencer who you sent a book to. Did you tell her ahead of time that you're going to send it? How did you set that up?
Yeah, I definitely told her. And the way I approach influencers, I didn't go for influencers I didn't know at all. Like, I really think like relationships are really important, and having some sort of connection rather than cold emailing people who may not know you. I just think there's less success and less willingness on their part to really be an active part. So I just messaged her like, hey, as you may know, my mom and I created this book to help millennials make Indian food easy and approachable. And her brand is really interesting because she does a lot of lifestyle fashion stuff, but also a lot of recipes herself. So I knew her audience was interested in this stuff, and she creates like new agey Indian food to like hangover pasta. So like fun things that really speak to a millennial. Mm-hmm. And I asked her, okay, we don't really have a big budget, but this is something you'd be willing to share. No pressure if you don't want to. Like, there's no expectation on your part to like post 5 times or do anything. Like, we're just sending this to you. And if you feel so inclined to, here's a discount code to share with your audience. And I sent it to her, and she was so great in just sharing it, using her swipe up feature and all of that. And then she got a lot of good questions about it from her audience. So she reshared it again that same day. So that was really successful. And
so obviously she was compelled to do that because she knew that her audience would like it. So it was easy for her to say yes to.
Right. It wasn't like she's like a beauty blogger, who travels and just, it did really fit with what her audience likes. So it wasn't just about her, as you're mentioning. Yeah, it's about what gives value to her people too.
That's fun. I like that. So you're now an entrepreneur, you're founder of Citrus and Gold, but you used to work with LinkedIn, and I'm curious what some of the key things you're bringing from LinkedIn, key concepts in marketing that you're bringing to your own business, what those might be.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So to give a little background about what I did at LinkedIn, I was there for about 4.5, 5 years, and I did roles from like advertising to market research to like analytics for sales and marketing. So my experience was very broad, but also very centered to the data behind marketing. So that was an interesting part, because I feel like it very much used the left side of my brain there, and I felt like I was missing a little bit of that right side where I am creative. I like to write. So basically, kind of like, long story short, Citrus and Gold is blending both the left and right side of the brain, where we're blending intuition and analytics to create a really compelling marketing strategy. Personally, though, I think instead of like just like tangible skills of like, oh, I learned X process at LinkedIn that translates directly to my clients now, because realistically, that's just not true. I mean, LinkedIn, my clients were like these giant tech companies like Amazon and Google, who have very different needs than my clients now, who are solo entrepreneurs, who are coaches and healers. So in terms of like direct skills, it probably doesn't translate as well. What does is a lot of just the structures and systems. Like, how do I make things easier for my clients? How do I make things easier for my own marketing? And just even having a little bit more systematic and structured way of thinking. I like to think I'm free-spirited and flowy, but compared to most of my clients, I'm very much more like, okay, let's do X, Y, and Z. So a lot of my clients appreciate that. Like I have a little bit more of that corporate, like solid background where I can be like, okay, here are 3 goals. Here are things we need to do. And not only go by the book, but know when I need to just bring in like heartful conversations and things like that. So I think that's been really good. But for me personally, honestly, it's given me confidence, for better or for worse, to be like, yeah, I work with these really big companies. I also consulted at Stripe for a bit. Like, if I can figure out problems for these companies, why can I not do it for my clients? And on the flip side, like sometimes you can think like, oh, these big companies have everything figured out. No, they don't. There's so much things that don't make sense. So giving a little bit of like, okay, there's no perfect way of doing things. A lot of times you're just figuring out by testing and doing things and iterating and changing things on the fly. So that's kind of like a learning. Like, yes, even when you are at a big established company, there's a lot of room to test and grow and learn.
Yeah, it's such a good reminder that, you know, all the stuff that we see in our world, somebody pretty much made up, and then either somebody decided to improve it or didn't. And so sometimes what we see in the world is just like the first try that somebody, you know, like,
right. Yeah.
I'm looking out my window and just looking at these buildings, and someone was like, let's make a box of bricks and slap a roof on top. That's like that's one way to make a house. You know, but it could be anything. Yeah.
Yeah, no one knows really what they're doing in the beginning. That's what I've learned.
And I'm curious how you decided to become an entrepreneur, given starting off in large corporate setting.
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is something I was journaling about the other day. So I'm like, why am I on this journey again? Like always reminding myself of like what this means to me. There's a lot to it. I think part of it was very much on like the first external side of things. I'm like, well, I have a great job. I have these great perks. Like things are great, but why am I not still happy? Like what is missing? So that kind of was alarming for me where, you know, you have the 401k, you have the free food, the free gym, all the tech perks. You know, your coworkers are great, your salary is great, but it doesn't feel great. So that was making me feel really curious, a little guilty at first because I'm like, I should be happier. But I think what it came down to was being able to fully express who I am and bring my full self to work in the way I want to. And it's not like it wasn't a welcoming culture in any way. I just think the way corporations are set up, you're leaving a lot of who you are at home, or not, you're not really showing it. So really, like, to be blunt, what I was getting sick of was making the same old white men rich and working on the same old problems. And not, my really big thing is really helping women be seen and empowering women with their ideas and their stories. And, you know, the client work I was doing at LinkedIn just didn't do that at that same extent. So I knew I had like this deeper mission. I didn't know how it was going to look like. On a personal level, I really wanted to prioritize my health and my own happiness and like create a different lifestyle for myself. So I was thinking about these two things, like, okay, personally, like I don't really love being in the same office 9 to 6 every day. I like a little different lifestyle. Okay, that's something to note. I also, there's like deeper mission of really helping women be seen and empowering them. And then I'm just passionate about health and wellness. So I had these 3 different parts where I was trying to jumble and mix like what would be the solution. And I didn't have that answer right away. I mean, I left LinkedIn without a plan, to be honest.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I didn't be like, yep, this is what I'm going to do. So like Citrus and Gold has been such a work in progress, from just something where I would share stories and write as a blog to a community, to a business, to like now what it is. And yeah, I left and gave myself permission, like, okay, there's 3 months. I want to figure out what I want to do. And, you know, maybe I'll go back to a corporate job if something sounds good. So I was in this like in-between zone for quite a while. But more and more organically, I saw that my knowledge and my skills and my desire to learn more about marketing was really there. And people needed that. And the people who wanted to help needed that too. So I slowly kind of started getting into this this world. I wouldn't say being an entrepreneur was like a mistake, as I might hear sometimes, like, oh, I just fell into this. Like, no, it's very intentional for me to create my own path. I just did not know what it would look like from day one.
That's cool. So, and it sounds like you didn't have urgency around needing to decide one way or another.
Yeah, and I was blessed for that. And I like, if I felt like, oh, I need to make money, I would freelance here and freelance there, and I'd find ways to make that work. I think the urgency wasn't coming from any external factors. At times I was like, I need to figure this out for myself because X, Y, and Z, when I realized those reasons aren't really valid. And I'm just putting this pressure to do something, to be something, when, you know, we have to enjoy the journey itself as well.
Yeah. And so what was your family thinking and saying to you at this time? Because I know, or at least I think you come from like a first generation immigrant family, which my impression is that immigrant families are often like security focused. And so it can be hard to think about entrepreneurship when you have like a job with great perks.
Yeah, no, and then you're right about that like immigrant mentality. I wouldn't say my parents. So I'll give you some background. Like where I grew up was very much an Asian American community where your definition of success was if you got into Harvard, Stanford, Berkeley, all these Ivy Leagues and top tier schools. And then once you get a great job, you know, you're successful. That's like kind of the lifestyle I had seen and I thought would be what I would be doing. And in a way I did. And I think what my parents wanted for me to be is happy and secure, as you mentioned. But to my surprise, they were actually very, very supportive of this. And even more to my surprise, my dad was like, even before I had thought of this, he's like, maybe sometime like Citrus and Gold can be a full-time thing. And at this point, it was just like a blog, which I'm like, how? Like, I did not see that reality. So it was interesting because my dad's been in Silicon Valley all his life. He's worked at startups. He's been like at the C-level, you know, done that whole hustle. And I think what I see from him, a part of him wants to do his own thing and part of him wants to take that. So, but he feels this responsibility for the family to do things a certain way. So I think he sees that in himself. And he's like, okay, you know, maybe I didn't live that dream, but I want you to do that. And he's never said this explicitly, but I feel like that is very true in this case. Yeah.
And that's cool that he saw potential there in Citrus and Gold. I'm curious, is Citrus and Gold some sort of play on like right brain, left brain blending?
No, it isn't. It was a name very intentionally chosen that can evolve as I do, as my business evolves. I saw something like, I like the symbolism of both. Like citrus is something that's energizing, that's fresh, that like feels good to me personally. And then gold, I think, is really like a sense of achievement, success. I'm also from California, the Golden State. So it has like different layers of meaning, but I felt like from a branding perspective, it sounds good. The domains were available, which is huge. And it's easy to remember. So that's why I chose it.
Uh-huh. So I'm thinking of, there's some sort of electrochemical properties. You can make a battery, for example, with lemons. And I know gold is often, you know, like you'll have gold plated headphone jacks and things like that. So there's potentially some analogy there with like electricity.
Oh, that's interesting. See, that's why I love it. You can add more layers and deeper layers to that. I mean, if you think about a name like Apple, we can give that so many different meanings. And that's why I kind of chose something that can have different angles and layers to it.
Cool. So let's dig in a little bit to what you're doing with clients. And maybe we could start with some of the common mistakes that you see, like coaches and healers, and let's include thought leaders in there, since I work with a lot of thought leaders, when they first start and they've got something they're going to sell, a service or a product, and they're like, okay, cool, I need to get this out on social media, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. What do you see them doing? And then sort of how do you have to retrain them to do it more strategically?
Yeah, so what I see a lot with marketing online, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, or even email, the biggest mistake people make first is like they don't have their own clarity on like what they want to create and what they want to do. They're like, oh, it'd be fun just to, post on Instagram, but it's almost coming back to the brand about like what is that mission for you? Like why are you creating this content in the first place? And getting that clarity first within you so you have like almost like a compass or a center to be like, this is what I'm doing and this is what I want to do. The second part I think is like knowing your audience and knowing who you're talking to. I think often, and not to blame anyone, but we're always like so fixated on thinking about what we want, where we also forget about, hey, the only reason our brand's going to grow is because of our audience on the other side. So really understanding what you can do to serve them and bring value. And this is true, obviously, for coaches and healers, because that's like the name of what they do, but also for thought leaders, where even if you are, let's say, a travel blogger or travel influencer, like what kind of tips are you giving to people? How are you engaging your audience rather than just having a picture of you at the beach? So the connection to you and your audience is really important. And I find like the clarity within yourself and then also knowing your audience is what leads to authenticity. So like having that, like, I know myself and I know my audience, that's really what gives you really good messaging and clear direction of like what you want to say. I think those are the two things that seem so easy to narrow down, but can be really hard for people to get clear with. And one of the last things is like, well, so many people, when we first start out, feel like we have to copy what other people are doing online to be successful. And, one thing I like to say, like, we don't want another acai bowl. We don't need another like selfie with no substance. Like, what are you bringing that's unique? And we all have it. It's just about taking the time to tap into it and really getting comfortable being you online.
And being you online is sometimes easier said than done.
Yes.
I want to get into that, but first, maybe you could tell us how you help people figure out clarity about what they want, if that's the first step.
Yeah, it's interesting. The way we do this can look different with everyone. Sometimes I like lead them through a meditation and we think about like, why are they doing this? Why are they here in the first place? Like getting really just like centered with themselves. Like that could be one way. The other way is just like, well, let's think about your why. I mean, this is like a huge thing we hear in burning all the time. Like, why did you do this? And sometimes, you can have someone do this journaling exercise, but that isn't as conducive. What I find really helpful with my clients is to interview them, to get their story out in a very casual way. Like as if you and I were talking over coffee or we were meeting in person over a drink. Like I like to have this conversation in a very relaxed setting because people aren't overthinking then. And you can really get deeper and deeper and see where there might be hesitations, where there might be some blocks, where they really know what they want, but they're afraid to actually say that. And it's better to do it in those like engaging conversations where I can be like, hey, I get you. I'm holding space for you. I understand what you're saying. So we can get deeper into that rather than, the first exercise wouldn't be like, okay, just write your mission statement. I think that's not as conducive as like having a first real conversation and then, maybe even going through a meditation or something together just to get that right feel. So it's interesting because it's like, that's where I blend in some of the intuition where it's like, yeah, we can write these like fancy mission statements or these like, I don't know, like I help statements, but first we need to get that flow, that communication really open.
Yeah. And I think you touched on something like being afraid to say something. I think to some degree we all are. Some people are great at being totally open, but most people are holding back at least a little bit. And so if you pinpoint something and you're like, I think this is something that you're a little afraid around, but you think it's important. What do you do with your clients then?
Yeah. So, and I would say like not everything always needs to be shared. There's certain personal things that don't, but so there's finding that right balance. Like, what the main thing is, and this is a thing that Donald Miller says from his book, Building a Story Brand, which I highly recommend. When you are the company, when you are the coach, healer, thought leader, you are the guide and your audience is the hero. So like you're like the Yoda while your, audience is like Luke Skywalker. Is your story going to help other people? Is this thing that you're afraid to say serving people in a way that's bigger than you? And in that case, like you have this responsibility to bring this lesson forward and almost taking that pressure off of like, oh, this is all about me. This is all what I need to say about just myself. It's like, no, we're sharing this story. This example is something that feels icky to say to help others too. And like shifting that little angle from just being like, okay, this is hard for me to say. And then part of the trickiness here is like the language around it, the words that we use, and like working with them to craft words that feel good, essentially.
Can you share an example in your own, some of the stories that you share where you had to adopt that, I'm doing this in service of the hero, of, my customer as the hero?
Yeah. Oh, let me think. I don't exactly remember what I shared, but this is something I'm still working through a little bit. Like I have this thing, as I mentioned, to help women be seen and empowered. But even more personally, I have, I think, a responsibility for women minorities, especially South Asian women. And I talked about my own lack of self-confidence, my own kind of dialogue, and I guess my own struggles with my own worth and like how maybe conditioning in society has like affected that. But I got really open about that. And I just felt like, hey, sometimes I don't speak up for this population that much, but I want to know that I'm sharing this because I want you to know that I'm here for you. I feel what you're going through and like I'm fully supporting you. So it did kind of push me to be more vulnerable and tell them like, hey, I'm not this person who's always knows what to do, always feels confident. Like I have my struggles and it's still very present and real. So that was like one thing that's actively that I'm working through still.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's making me think of like what groups I personally identify with, like middle class white guy. Okay, like what are our struggles? Or what are the things that I'm feeling, like, given that we've had a pretty easy ride, in a lot of ways. So that's really, really interesting. And maybe one of the struggles is like, for people like me, if we've had a really easy ride, then do we even know what we're capable of, for example?
Yeah, that's so interesting. So much to think about there.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. So when you've got something, and let's talk about being polarizing and sharing something that brings your customer to you, and also lets people who are not your customer sort of disagree with it or something, so that they don't have to follow you anymore. Personally, I have trouble with being too vanilla, I think, because I want people to like me. So is there a way to take an idea that you want to share, a story, and just dial it up a notch in terms of how impactful or polarizing it could be?
Yeah, there are ways to do it, and it's not always the most straightforward, I'd say, because we all have this kind of pressure of feeling we have to please everyone who's following us, or please, like, your friend from high school who might be your Facebook friend who doesn't really care about what you offer anymore. So again, it kind of goes back to like, well, is speaking the truth going to help other people? Is this going to move the needle in some way? And oftentimes this comes through conversation too, like, okay, if you were going to tell this to a friend or someone you're close to, what would you really want to say? And like, what are the lessons in there as well? I think like actually to take a step back a little bit to think about an example in like real life that was really polarizing. If people are familiar with Nike's campaign with Colin Kaepernick, that was extremely polarizing. There are some people who are like, oh my gosh, Nike's doing amazing things to stand up for social causes and bring in more of that dialogue. And there are other people who are like, I'm never going to buy from Nike again. So that's an example first of like what polarity looks like. Now, we don't have to be all as extreme as Nike, and most of our content is not going to get that same reaction because we're not Nike. That's okay. But it's in that way, it attracted more people to you and repelled others away. And you have to decide like, well, am I someone who's going to do that for my brand? And most likely you'd like to, because there are thousands of other thought leaders, thousands of other coaches, thousands of other healers. Like, what makes what you say different? And often it's like what words you use, what you choose to speak up for, what's going to be important for your audience, your clients to know about you, but also going to help them as well. So one question I ask clients sometimes is like, what's something that you really want to share but are afraid to say? Or like, what's something that you see that completely drives you insane? And like, get these questions out there and start planting those seeds to be like, oh, I just wish people would stop doing this. Or I just wish like I was talking about this more, and kind of like nudging them with these questions first. So my role as like a consultant, I really act like a journalist first, because people need help peeling away these layers. So helping them to get these words out first is really helpful. And then in certain ways we craft the content together where we make sure like, okay, what is the main takeaway of this? Like, are we just being polarizing for the sake of it? Or is there actually a takeaway? And it's really good to anchor on that takeaway and like, what is the purpose of this? Because we don't want to say something polarizing and maybe risque just for the sake of it. I think there's always like a reason behind it. So finding that reason, finding who you're talking to and their desire behind it, and then making sure like we're doing like questions to get little nudges of like what that message even is.
Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming this is where research and understanding your customer comes in. Like, so you're thinking of a takeaway directly related to the desires and needs of your customer.
Exactly. Market research is something that is so valuable and so important, and it can happen in many different ways. Sometimes you're just asking one-off questions to your audience on Instagram polls or like Insta stories. Other ways it could be more comprehensive surveys or conversations, and that really helps you get comfortable with speaking your truth and really saying what you want to say, because you know there's someone else on the other side who needs to hear this.
So it sounds like you're saying you use the little polls in Instagram stories to do some of this?
Yeah, sometimes. So that's a great way. I recently have been just using more open-end questions. Like, what do you guys feel? Like, what do you guys think? And like seeing what words people use, but if they're very small things about like, hey, would you rather hear about this or that? And using that as a kind of quick check. I think polls are a great option. So there's a lot of different ways that Instagram specifically has ways we can collect research and information about our audience.
Cool. I'm thinking I have an intern, and so I'm thinking about her, like what types of market research and what types of content creation can I have someone on my team do versus me doing?
Great question. So in general, I think this is interesting because I feel like different people have different levels of like protectiveness over their content, where some are like, I'm the only one who can, really say my voice. Some other people's like, I just don't want to write. I just want to hand this off. So it really depends first on your comfort level of having someone else do your content. But in reality, I think if you do it well, like you should be able to have someone fully own your content process in some way. What would be important, though, are like some specific guidelines, like, well, what is your voice like online? Do you use emojis? Do you do these things? There's little like details like that, but also like this is tricky because this is where I'm like, well, is your intern someone who likes to write or not? So there's a lot of things I would think about. Maybe, I'm trying to find a good answer for this because I feel like it's going to be different for everyone. But generally what I say is if we can usually I work with clients to be like, let's create the structure, let's create the story together. And then if there are gaps for captions that people can fill in, once we have that like concrete brand story, the concrete why, the main reason for this like campaign, then you can have people fill in the gaps. I just don't know sometimes if like the person who you've hired, if other people hired, feel comfortable writing content. For example, I have a virtual assistant who's amazing, I don't think she'd be the one to write content for me. But in some cases, I have clients who I am the person writing content for them. Our process, though, is very collaborative because I feel like, especially for solo entrepreneurs, your voice is really important in it. So I feel like, I don't know if it's a great answer, but I feel like there's different ways to work around this and different processes depending on like your comfort level and like the skill set of the people you hire.
Yeah. And in this case, I'm kind of excited about exploring it because I see that she's a really good writer. And so, the opportunity sort of presented itself in that way.
Yeah. So what I'd recommend you to start off with her is like get on a phone call, have like a 20-30 minute conversation, have her like tell her like what you want to say, just like in words, like, hey, intern, whatever her name is, like, I really want to talk about this for my latest, let's say my influencer trip in Morocco. Here's some things I'm thinking, and just give her like the main talking notes and give her all information you can about this trip. Like, the more information she has, the better she'll be equipped to write. One copywriter once told me, like, whenever I am facing writer's block, I'm asking myself, what information do I not have? So give her as much information, background, backstory on this that you can, and that's going to really empower her to write for you.
Cool. That's helpful. What information do I not have?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
often
curious,
it's not a creative block. Just to go back on that, it's usually just like there's a disconnect with either what you want to say or what you're saying to your audience, or background on even like what the topic is itself.
Gotcha. And what underlying systems do you often set up for people? I'm imagining like some sort of content calendar, but maybe a lot more than that.
Yeah, so I'll start with like the tools that I use to do this. The content calendars are huge, where it's not just telling you like when to post. It's really, we're creating the outline of like, okay, here's some reoccurring themes that are coming up in your content. There might be a theme of trust. There might be a theme of self-love. There also might be a theme of surviving, whatever that might be in. And then like we take these bigger themes, and I found a process. I usually like to use Asana to do this, to break this out into more like there's sub themes underneath these too. So we kind of lay it all out and map it all out first. And then once we see these like sub topics and themes underneath these, there's like a never ending tree and branches of this. I like to plan it out in Planoly if we're just doing Instagram, and like not only just the content in terms of the words, but also the pictures too, because half the battle sometimes like, oh, I know what I want to say, but I don't have the pictures. So we kind of like have a process of getting all of that ready in Planoly. But if we're using other tools like email, Facebook, and all of that, I actually plan out a lot of this with my clients in Asana. So we use a way to, again, these same themes, how do we bridge the gap between email and Instagram, and like in some ways repeat what we are saying on Instagram and email and have a content calendar in there. So, I mean, to be honest, a lot of it is creating a content calendar, but it's not just like when is the right time to post. It's also about like, what do we want to say and what is that call to action for the content. So, because you can tell people, okay, you should post about this, but then half the battle is like actually getting them to post the content.
Right. Can you draw a line from how posting something on Instagram would lead to actual income generation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I have my clients often think about a customer journey or like going back to that example of like a hero's journey, right? Most people need to be like wooed and caressed for a while before they'll actually buy from you, whether that's a coaching package or just like a cookbook for me, for example. So, and it's likely that, they see one post and they'll buy. But what I tell my clients to is to build a story around their brand, build a story around their product, and take that customer on that story journey with them. So what I found I'll give my cookbook as an example, the post where I'm like, oh, there's a sale and you get 15% off aren't the ones that always convert first. It's like, I had this really elaborate story about you've moved away far from home, you're missing your mom's cooking, the Indian food, in New York City at takeout's not going to cut it. And using that as a way to kind of like take people through this journey. And like when I did that kind of post, I had like 10 people be like, oh, that resonates with me so much. I'm buying this book right now. So part of it is like, you still need to do this like promotional post with this 15% discounts, for example, in this case, but you really want people to feel really connected to you and connected to your product. And then the sales kind of happen like sporadically, in the sense of like, it may not be like, oh, I know this exact content is what sold them, but you're building that awareness. You're bringing that kind of customer on that journey with you, where they might be following you on your Instagram, then they might download something free and get on your email list. They might read a few pieces of content. So I feel like you kind of really take this customer on a journey. And even if you're an influencer and you're just like promoting products, you're still thinking about the story behind it and thinking about like the different layers of how this audience member, this reader, can go on this journey with you. So really what I say is like, for sales, don't think about that one transaction, that one post as your way of doing the sale, but thinking about what else can you do to take this reader on this journey with you so that they eventually buy.
Yeah. Could we do a real quick example? This will help me think about it, and maybe for the audience, like with my own business, for example, it could be any branch. So maybe one of these Adventure Quest trips. Yeah. So like, what would be a relevant story to share for someone that I'm targeting to come on a trip?
Yeah. The first question I'd ask back to you is like, what are they hoping to gain out of this trip? Like, what is going to be something they'd be really excited by, and what's something they're struggling with right now? Yeah.
So generally each trip has I try to have a trip solve a particular problem, whether it's like confidence or creativity. And this upcoming trip to Morocco, for example, is people who are trying to be influencers and they're ready to like fully live the life, start making money using their Instagramming. I think there's different elements. There's like what do we say in the post? There's like having great images and story. Like a lot of the stuff we've been talking about today, actually. But I want people to live it. I want them to go on an adventure and then be able to use that in their content.
And what are they missing right now by not being able to live this lifestyle?
I suppose it's just an understanding of what it takes. Probably a lot of them have been posting on social media for years even, and not understanding like either how to make money from it, or how to get free trips from it, or even, why their photos, the quality of their photos hasn't improved, or like lots of little different things.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's probably so many stories around this. One thing that comes up to my mind right now is like, if I know you've been posting tirelessly on Instagram for years, you're like posting photos all the time and no one's engaging, no one's responding. You feel alone and isolated in this community. I think that, again, one of the values that you're bringing is like a community of like-minded individuals. So adding in some of that emotion is going to be really helpful. And you're really just ready to live that life of a travel influencer, as someone who is a thought leader. And we're curating this trip in Morocco to really help you live that life, to give you that skill so that your pictures will be seen, that to give you the community so you feel like you have other individuals supporting you, whatever that might be. So these are kind of like pulling on their pain points and like seeing what they really want. And we chose this beautiful destination of Morocco to give you the perfect scene for great pictures, engagement. So again, thinking about what do they want out of this, and a fun experience to really look back on. That's just something that came to mind, and that's just something to think about as you're thinking about what do they really, really want. Like, yes, they say they want like better engagement, but what is that getting them more? And what is that really leading towards? And painting a story around that even.
Yeah. Gosh. You're good at this. That was very helpful. Thank you.
Glad.
Yeah.
Glad.
Cool. Okay, I'm gonna go test something. I'm gonna do a post and keep that in mind today.
I'm excited to see it.
Yeah. Akansha, where can people find you and connect with you online? What's the best place?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at citrusandgold, and then also my website is citrusandgold.com. And hey, if you want to become my Facebook friend, just feel free to add me. My name is Akansha Agrawal. That's Agrawal. I'm sure we can add all of that into the show notes. But yeah, say hello, say what's up. I would love to hear from anyone who's listened to this episode.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you coming on the show. Very useful for me. I'm sure useful for a lot of people. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Really fun stuff in that interview with Akansha. And obviously I had to ask for some personal advice, for some personal coaching in there. And it was so cool, right? To hear her quickly take the concept of this Morocco Adventure Quest trip for influencers and dig into the pieces of what I could do with a post around that. So you could see her in action. You could see all those years of thinking about this stuff come into play. And that's the thing with any coach or consultant that you bring in. Their vast amount of experience is able to have them provide you with, just a quick little, like, here, try this, or change this, or here's an idea for you. And it might seem quite simple or straightforward, but the reason that we're not doing these things, the reason in this case, we're not posting stories that are engaging on social media is because we just maybe don't have the experience yet. And so having access to someone that has been thinking about this for a lot, and whatever it is, sports, business, social media, marketing, whatever, is when you can get access to the experts, and you're getting a little window here in the interviews on this podcast. But when you hire someone and you spend time and they can actually, if it's Akansha or myself, they can get you right to where you want to be going. And that's really, when we talk about mentors, that's really what's happening. Really good coaches and mentors are helping you acquire their knowledge that they have without you having to spend the years figuring it out yourself. It's a little bit of a tangent there, but I just want to use this to highlight the importance of really good advice and mentors. So thanks to Akansha for playing along and her coaching me a little bit today. Great stories and content from her. Hopefully that helps. Please let her or me or us, both of us, know what you're going to try in response to this interview, what you're taking away and what you're actually going to go and implement, because this is a very implementable, action-oriented interview. So connect with either of us on Instagram. That's since we're talking about Instagram, that's going to be the best place for you to go. Thanks so much for listening to today's interview. Now it's your turn to go out there and be adventurous.